The chapel smelled faintly of old wood and lilies, sunlight filtering through the tall, stained glass windows in colored shards that fell across the aisle. Every pew was filled, townsfolk dressed in their Sunday best, hats in hand, handkerchiefs fluttering to fan warm faces in the summer heat. The hush that lingered over the room was broken only by the minister's calm, practiced voice, reading words that had been spoken countless times before. Yet for her, the bride standing at the altar, those words felt heavier than chains. Her dress clung to her like a prison of lace and satin, delicate and beautiful but suffocating. The long veil obscured her vision, softening the room into blurred shapes and muted colors. Beneath it, tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks unchecked. Her throat tightened with every syllable of the vow, each one an echo of a life she had not chosen but had been thrust into. Guests in the pews leaned forward, whispering to one another, mistaking her tears for joy or sentiment. Only she knew the truth. They were not tears of happiness, but of surrender. Her groom stood tall at her side, posture stiff, his face calm in a way that felt rehearsed. He did not look at her with tenderness or understanding, but with pride, as though she were another achievement, another promise fulfilled. His hand gripped hers firmly, as if to remind her that she was his now, bound by the vows spoken in front of God and everyone they knew. She wanted to pull away, to let her fingers fall limp in his. But her upbringing, her parents' expectations, and the eyes of the whole town held her in place like invisible ropes. The minister's words seemed to stretch on forever, and with each one her tears multiplied. She tried to swallow them back, tried to force herself to smile, to pretend for their sake if not for her own, but the ache in her chest was too sharp, too consuming. Her lips trembled, her body quivered beneath the heavy lace, and the sob she tried to bury broke free, echoing faintly in the quiet chapel. Heads turned, whispers grew louder. Some nodded approvingly, convinced she was overcome with joy. Others frowned, sensing the sorrow that radiated from her like a storm. And then from the back of the chapel, a sound faint and familiar reached her ears. The jingle of spurs against wood, soft but distinct. A rhythm she recognized in her bones. Her heart stuttered in her chest, her breath catching as if her soul itself remembered before her mind could. She turned her eyes, blurred through tears, toward the doorway. There he was. A cowboy, broad-shouldered and worn by the trail, stood leaning in the frame. His hat rested low over his brow, shadowing his face. But she would have known him anywhere. His presence struck her like lightning, the air charged between them. He was not dressed for the ceremony. His shirt, though clean, was faded by sun and sweat, his boots scuffed by miles of dust. Yet he looked more real, more alive, than anything else in that carefully polished chapel. Memories rushed back in a torrent. Summer evenings when the world felt boundless. His laughter carried across open fields, the warmth of his hand steadying hers. When she tried to ride bareback for the first time, the fire in his eyes when he promised her once that she deserved, more than what the world expected. And now here he was, a silent witness to the vows that were breaking her heart. She dropped her gaze quickly, terrified someone else would notice, terrified her tears would betray more than sorrow. But even as she tried to focus on the minister's steady voice, her mind drifted back to him. Her chest tightened painfully. What was he doing here? Why now when it was already too late? The groom's hand tightened on hers, urging her attention forward, reminding her where she stood. But her tears betrayed her, streaking freely down her cheeks, falling onto her gloves, dampening the delicate bouquet she clutched. She could not stop them, could not silence the grief clawing inside her. Her sobs were quiet but unrelenting, the kind of tears that did not cleanse but carved deep. And then it happened. A shadow moved beside her, a presence so near it startled her into holding her breath. The cowboy had stepped forward, bold enough to close the distance between them in that holy place. No one else seemed to notice. All eyes were on the minister, all ears tuned to the ceremony. But she felt him, closer than anyone should have been. He leaned in, his voice low, meant only for her. It was not polished or practiced like the groom's formal tone. It was rough, warm, steady. The sound of the prairie wind brushing through tall grass, the comfort of a fire crackling on a cold night. "I'll make you smile someday," he whispered. The words cut through her sorrow like sunlight through storm clouds. She froze, her breath catching, her tears slowing for the first time. Her heart ached all over again, but differently now. Not with despair, but with something she thought she had lost. Hope. Her veil hid her expression from the guests, but beneath it her lips trembled, then curved just slightly. A fragile smile breaking through the weight of grief. It was small, uncertain, almost hidden, but it was real. The first true smile she had felt in months. No one else in the chapel noticed, not even the groom whose hand held hers so firmly. But the cowboy saw it. And in that moment, the vows spoken around her no longer felt like the end of everything she had dreamed. They felt like a pause, a trial she had to endure. Because somewhere, somehow, a promise had been made. Not of obligation, but of love. Her tears still clung to her lashes. Her bouquet still trembled in her hands. But deep inside something shifted. His words lingered. In her ears, branded into her heart like a secret vow of their own. Someday. The thought pulsed through her like a heartbeat, steady and sure, even as the minister asked her to repeat the words that bound her to another. And though she spoke them, voice breaking, tears still spilling, her soul clung to the promise whispered at her side. For the first time that day, she knew she was not lost. Not entirely. The prairie stretched wide under the fading light, endless and untamed. The sky painted in strokes of gold and violet as the sun melted into the horizon. The air was warm with the scent of earth and wildflowers. The kind of evening that wrapped around a person like a memory, soft yet insistent. She stood by the old wooden fence, her hands resting lightly on the rough beams, her eyes drinking in the colors of dusk. The cotton dress she wore was simple, the hem brushing against her ankles in the breeze, a stark contrast to the heavy satin and lace she had worn weeks before. Here, stripped of the weight of expectations, she felt closer to herself than she had in a long time. Her hair, once pinned and veiled, now tumbled freely over her shoulders, strands catching the last light of the day. She had come here often since the wedding, seeking solace in the wide spaces that seemed to breathe when she could not. She had not meant to wait for him, not consciously, yet each time the wind shifted or a horse's distant hoofbeats carried across the plains, her heart leapt in anticipation. Tonight was no different, though she told herself it was. The sound came then, faint at first, like a heartbeat carried on the ground, a horse's steady gait closer and closer. Her fingers tightened on the fence rail as the rhythm grew louder, until the silhouette of a rider emerged from the violet horizon. The horse was tall and sure-footed, its coat dark against the fading light, mane flicking with each stride. The cowboy sat tall in the saddle, his figure etched against the sunset as if he had risen from the very earth. He slowed the horse as he neared, swinging down with practiced ease, boots landing on the dry earth with a thud that sent her pulse racing. He tied the reins loosely over the post, giving the animal a pat before turning his full attention to her. His hat shaded his face, but she could see the sharp lines of his jaw. The weathered skin marked by sun and wind. The eyes that always seemed to hold both steel and softness. For a moment neither spoke. The silence heavy but not empty, filled with everything that lingered unspoken between them. The breeze rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and dust, lifting the edge of her dress. She finally turned her gaze to him, her eyes steady though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You shouldn't have said that to me," she murmured, her voice low, almost lost in the evening air. The words carried weight, though they were not sharp. They trembled with longing, with fear, with the remnants of vows she had spoken but had never truly claimed as her own. His expression didn't falter. He stepped closer, his boots crunching softly against the earth, his presence grounding and unshakable. "I meant it," he said, his voice the same low timbre that had carried to her in the chapel, steady as the plains themselves. "I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what stands in the way. You weren't meant to live with tears on your wedding day. You were meant to laugh so hard it carries across the prairie." Her throat tightened, the memory of her tears flooding back, mingling with the fragile smile he had coaxed from her in that moment. She had replayed those words endlessly, whispering them to herself in the dark, clinging to them like a lifeline. They had both comforted and tormented her, because they were a promise she longed for but feared she would never be able to claim. "You don't know what you're asking of me." she said, though her voice lacked conviction. She turned her gaze away, out toward the horizon where the last light of day glowed like embers. My life isn't my own anymore. I made vows. Her voice faltered, her grip on the fence tightening until her knuckles whitened. I can't just walk away. He took another step, close enough now that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint leather and dust clinging to his clothes. I'm not asking you to walk away tonight, he said softly. I'm asking you to remember who you are when you're not standing in someone else's shadow. To remember the girl who used to ride wild across these fields, hair flying, laughter spilling. She's still here. I saw her. I see her now. Her eyes burned, though this time with something more complicated than sorrow. Hope rose unbidden, dangerous and intoxicating. She turned toward him, her lips parting, but no words came. His eyes held hers steadily, unwavering, as though he could see every wall she had built and every crack running through them. I don't need vows written in a book, he continued, his voice firm but gentle. I don't need a crowd or a minister or promises made under someone else's watch. I just need what's true. And what's true is that your smile, your real smile, is worth waiting a lifetime for. I'll wait. Whether it takes a day or a year or longer than that, I'll wait until you can laugh with me again, until you can live free. Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat, though no tears fell. She pressed a hand against her mouth, not to silence herself, but to steady the flood of emotions that surged through her. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that life had already been decided for her, that she had no right to hope. But the words refused to form. Deep down, she knew he was right. She wasn't meant for a life of silent tears and hollow smiles. The prairie around them seemed to hush, as if listening, the wind easing, the birds gone quiet. She lowered her hand slowly, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. And then, like the breaking of dawn, her lips curved. Small at first, hesitant, but then fuller, brighter, the weight on her chest loosening. It wasn't the polite smile she had worn for weeks, the one people expected. It was hers, born of something real, something wild and untamed. A flicker of triumph and tenderness mingling in his gaze. He tipped his hat slightly, not as a farewell, but as a vow. The cowboy's eyes softened, sealing the promise he had already made. She couldn't stop the laugh that slipped out, quiet and breathless, but real. It startled her, how easy it felt, how natural. For the first time since that day in the chapel, she wasn't drowning. The sun sank lower, the sky deepening into twilight, stars beginning to blink awake above them. She knew the road ahead would not be simple, that choices loomed heavy and consequences waited. But in this moment, beneath the endless sky with the man who had whispered life back into her soul, she believed in something she hadn't dared to for a long time. Someday was no longer a distant dream. It had already begun here, on this quiet prairie evening where her tears gave way to laughter and her heart at last remembered how to hope.